Episode 53 picks up right where we left off, with Bertolt beginning his march. And to immediately set the tone for the sequence, note how initially, there is no music. It is just deafening silence, only broken by Bertolt's movements and his steam. Only when he reaches his full, terrifying height does the music kick in, which I think is again just putting us in the shoes of the scouts, just trying to take in what's actually happening. That lack of any guiding track really emphasizes those lumbering footsteps and the destruction he has caused, which I think very efficiently establishes the sheer scale of what is going on. Ditto for those upward-facing shots, making him seem even larger, that is then directly preceded by his hand swiping away these almost comically sized buildings. I think those deep, humming strings kicking in as even Eren's Titan seems disproportionately small is a very good encapsulation of what I mean. And by the way, because we'll be talking plenty about the scale of things, note where Eren's head is in all of these scenes. And yes, the audio in this room is still a work in progress, that's why I have two microphones, don't worry about it. And another classic AOT thing that we see here is that whiplash in tone. Connie's voice is shaking as he talks about the houses Bertolt is just flinging across Shiganshina. But a split second later, he starts laughing, saying, "Oh, he's airing out Eren's house." First off, that is just very, very dumb, and I love it. But secondly, it is incredibly effective in conveying the horror of this situation. Traditionally, you would expect this kind of dumb joke to be almost comedic relief and that it would entirely undermine the intensity of the scene. But because we literally just heard his voice shaking, and because how the rest of the sequence is framed, that whiplash from him just busting out laughing becomes yet another unexpected emotion in what is already a bizarre mixture of hope, dread, and sadness. Think like Annie's laughter in Season 1, and that extremely chilling "Please Daddy No" scene that we saw in Utgard.
Sorry, Daddy! I'll be a good girlfriend now!
Another thing to note here is Mikasa and Armin talking about how Bertolt doesn't know where they actually are, and that he's just slicing and dicing at random. This feeds into that question of, why didn't Reiner and Barbecue immediately head for Shiganshina when Erwin, straight up told them there was something in Eren's basements? That land was Titan territory, they would have been completely uncontested. Super quick version because we've talked about this before. Number one, Shiganshina is just massive, so finding a single house among like 4 to 5 people tops would be just downright insane. Number two, there is no reason to rush the basement because they have their eyes on something much more valuable, that of course being Eren's Titan. And now we get to numero 3. Because the scouts are already boxed in, Bertolt can just wipe out Shiganshina, thereby eliminating any chance of them finding out about anything, and he can also recapture the Founding Titan in the process. Now, they're just taking their sweet time. But returning to the scouts, we see that everyone is just begging Armin for some sort of order. This both establishes the mirroring to Erwin throughout this episode, as well as functions as a callback to way back in Trust. As Armin remembers what Burrito said, he just thinks that he's not built for this and asks Jean to take the lead. If you recall what Marco said about how Jean is a good leader because he knows what it's like being scared and weak, this is again very much proving exactly that. Like we'd see throughout this episode, Jean is under no delusions that he is some grand strategist or commander. But when it comes to bolstering his own squad and making some quick decisions, he is more than capable. And so, he does exactly that, just calling for everyone to fall back while they figure out what to do next. And the vocals in this scene as Bertolt just marches in the background are so good. It definitely captures that dark fantasy, Soulsborne type vibe very well. As for Armin though, we close off this opening bit with him just trying to grapple with the fact that he is the only one capable of true strategy here. I would say no pressure, but the entire purpose of the scene is to create pressure, so pressure. As for the title of the episode, Perfect Game, I think there are a couple of interpretations. First is obviously the big monkey. He literally says that he's going for a perfect game, so not really much else to read into there, aside from the sort of two personalities we'd see with him. More on that next time though. But an alternate interpretation I would offer up is on the side of the scouts. As we'd soon see, traditional strategy is kind of a no-go in this situation, and the only way to face down the Colossal and the Colossal Monkey is with a perfect game of our own. If you can call everyone dying a perfect game, that is. Moving into the episode itself, much like we just saw on Armin's side, the episode immediately establishes that sense of futility. The scouts, as they've always done, just pick off the small titans, because hey, it makes sense, right? If we pick off the small ones, we can move on to the bigger ones and eventually get the monkey. It'll be all good. Except, we then jump to Levi trying to decipher what just happened on the other side of the wall with Bertolt's nuke and whether anyone is even alive anymore. But before he can get another word in, we get this beautiful slow motion shots of countless rocks dotting the entire sky. First off, the slow motion itself is a very good showcase of CG, enabling things that would otherwise be either A, very difficult to do, or B, next to impossible. Unlike live action productions where creating good slow motion is as simple as shooting at a higher frame rate, and can even be used to just pad out scenes for super cheap, in animation, well, you can't film at a higher frame rate because there is no frame rate, you need to create every single frame. This is definitely the kind of stuff that I think will get infinitely easier as AI gets implemented in animation, but it's really neat that WIT didn't skimp out on showing us this slightly surreal scene of the entire sky being peppered by Zeke's rocks. And of course, as we get to the Levi close-up, we are completely back to 2D animation, so just a clever use of technology there. And yes, before you leave a comment about that, I know Demon Slayer literally just did a super long slow motion sequence. And while people memed about it saying, oh, he's walking for 3 minutes, it's so badly paced, why would you even watch this? That was insane from a technical point of view. People can say whatever they want about Demon Slayer, this is not a video about that, I really don't care. But I think it'd be silly not to acknowledge the fact that it is the series that has started this entire animation arms race. Season 1 basically showed everyone that compositing is probably the most important thing in animation, and then we get to like the final season of Attack on Titan, and it's a lot of compositing. And that's what I mean, when we look at the WIT slow motion sequence, that was like a huge deal using CGI. And just a few years later, Demon Slayer is doing that in 2D animation. Personally, I think it's a bit insane. I think most people don't even realize how difficult it is to pull off, and we are basically nearing the AAA video game problem of people pouring hundreds of millions of dollars into making everything like photorealistic, even though most people don't actually care about it. Animation standards in like the past 5 to 10 years have just shot through the roof, and I don't know where this ends. But anyway, that's a whole separate tangent that maybe I'll make a video about one day. But still talking about the visuals, I love the way they make all the colors pop, as if we too were in that heightened Ackerman sense of mind. Everything is just a little more vibrant, just a little sharper, just a little more pronounced. And all of that is immediately ripped away as Levi gets absolutely pounded with hundreds of rocks. And that moment of Levi actually being in shock as we see this mist of blood creeping over the entire town, almost like death itself is swallowing the air around them, is absolutely spine-chilling. This is Levi, and he is shocked by an enemy. Even if you don't consciously connect the dots that this is the guy who has like a grand total of 3 facial expressions, I think subconsciously, you definitely know that this is beyond bad. And that horror shriek as we hear just countless screams followed by their bodies just flung into the air is, oh boy. Just like with Connie's very funny jokes on the other side of the wall, Zeke's nonchalant, oh that went a little high, is just like, what? If old Bathwater said that he doesn't think the Paradisians are devils, well then the big monkey is certainly trying to make up for that. Just try to imagine being the scouts here. It must have sounded like the world itself had begun to implode. Keep in mind that the most advanced weaponry they have within the walls are just cannons. Cannons shouldn't have that kind of range, let alone altitude, right? And to return to that Levi thread, he is screaming out orders here. Even going back just one episode, while Marlowe was struggling with the horses and whatnot, Levi was stone cold. Even after their enemies had already appeared, his resolve was completely unchallenged. Now, on the other hand, he is screaming at the top of his lungs while the entire town is just barraged. That shot of Dirk, still clinging onto life and just raising his eyes and seeing Zeke prepare for another throw is absolutely spine-chilling. And speaking of, the fact that we actually see 2 throws back to back, I think is another thing that just cements that sense of them being in way over their head. Zeke's first throw wasn't some massive reverse Uno or some super one-off ability like Bertolt's nuke. This is just a basic thing that he will now be doing over and over and over. Remember what I said about those siege tactics? Yeah, the trebuchets are now firing. But okay, real talk. How did Erwin get down the wall? I need a thorough explanation of how the ODM gear works, because if he's missing an arm and each of the hooks is activated by each of the swords, and he only has one arm, he can only use one of the hooks. So how does he, like, get down the wall? But okay, to be fair to Erwin, he is a Giga Chad, so maybe you can just use one hook and, you know, like hook that and then just go like down sideways, I guess. It's probably possible. With Erwin too now among the remainder of the scouts, those armament parallels really kick into high gear. Just about the first thing he says is, yeah, things are just terrible. Which, you know, doesn't bode well considering he is the biggest hype man of the series. And when Levi asks what happened to Hanji's group, he also just says, "I don't know." Much like Armin, he is grasping at straws right now. The remaining elites were just baited to the front lines and all wiped out in the space of a few minutes. All that's left are fresh recruits who, just like Jean warned, are nowhere near ready to be in the vanguard. And those who were ready, well, they became strawberry jam regardless. And the preceding scenes very much focus on that angle. As those harsh, pulsing beats cut through the music, Erwin says that there's no others left. And that is immediately followed by yet another barrage from Zeke. All the fresh recruits cry out in fear, while Levi and Erwin just stand there without even flinching. That blood-red mist coalescing all around them. It's like the purest distillation of the difference in their mindsets. These two have been through all of this before. Over and over, they have been the last ones standing, just cycling through these new recruits. As much as both are absolutely caught off guard by the way this plays out, there is also that somewhat twisted angle of them knowing that this has happened before. For some reason, they always survive, and so this must seem like some sort of twisted curse at this point. But before we cut back to Eren, we have to talk about that thing. Look, I just talked about using technology to make impossible things possible on a realistic budget, but let's be real, that does unfortunately look a little bit cursed. By the time Mappa took over, compositing standards in the industry were much higher, so considering how crisp the rest of the 2D animation is, some of these scenes have aged quite poorly. But the thing is, because it's compositing, I genuinely think that if someone talented, aka not me, took these scenes and essentially just freshened them up with new effects, they would look like 10 times better. Actually saying that, come with me real quick. As you can see, I am in the paths, but the thing is, my colors don't really blend with the background. The background looks like it's sort of, well, just a background. You know, I'm gonna break the illusion, it's not really there. It doesn't really look nice. But even with my skills, you do like a little bit of brightness and contrast, you add a little bit of a colorization filter, you do this and that, and suddenly it looks much better. So yeah, same scene, just a few more effects composited on top. It already exists, you don't really need to change it, you don't even need to reanimate it, you don't need a new CGI model. Some of the scenes we see with the Colossal, I genuinely think could be massively improved by just hiding some of the imperfections with like a little bit more smoke, darkening up the scene and making him pop just a little less. I'm sure there's at least a couple of people among you who know a bit more about this than me, so maybe it's a bit harder than I'm making it out to be, maybe it's actually much easier. If you do give it a shot, drop me a link, I want to see it. Jumping on over to the inside of Shiganshina, we get another beautiful new rearrangement of the classic Attack on Titan track. As Jean tells Eren to scream out Beechwood, since, you know, if he were to reach the wall, Erwin's squad is like instantly cooked, we get these few piano notes right before the music kicks into high gear. I think it perfectly captures that horror side of this conflict. And speaking of, all the different shots we get of them running, all the while Bertolt constantly marches behind them, I think too creates the sense of this omnipresent threat and just how boxed in we are. Not helped by the fact that the series is now hiding Reiner, who, you know, we know for a fact is alive. And as Mikasa says she'll go in for the kill, we get another excellent shot of the scouts all scattering as Eren looks up at the Colossal. This is basically that Yor meme, and I love it. But this is where we need to talk about scale. I've babbled on about this before, and with this, it is a much clearer case than it is with the Wall Titans, but Eren's size in, well, most scenes is very wrong. You'll have scenes where Eren, even while not standing straight, is level with the buildings. You'll have scenes where he is clearly taller than all the buildings to the point that he can look over them. You'll have scenes where he's almost perfectly level with the rooftops. And you'll have scenes like this where he literally looks like he could walk through the regular sized doors. No, but seriously, look at the doors and look at Eren's Titan. Something ain't right. All of this is with the simple goal of putting the audience in the headspace of the characters. Eren facing the Colossal is supposed to be this impossible task. Sure, he could be up to his knees as he realistically should be. But if he's still going to be kicked away, why not make him even smaller and create this forced perspective to emphasize that horror? I guess the simplest way to put it is that his proportions fluctuate to serve the narrative rather than just like strict realism. And the same goes for the inverse. When Eren is meant to be strong, we look at him facing upward. This is done all over television, and with animation, there is even greater freedom because, you know, those proportions don't actually exist. You can draw them however you like. I suppose if you want to be hypercritical, you can call this a plot hole, and I can sort of sympathize with wanting everything to have that sense of consistency and realism. but at the same time, this is a visual medium first and foremost, so I think taking some of those creative liberties is just a great call. And speaking of cool visuals, if you remember that Atlas to Sisyphus recontextualization I mentioned last time, I think this is also very much that. Just like Trost, Eren pushes and pushes, but in an instant, he is flung across the entire district like a bug. All his efforts were for naught, and this fight might as well begin anew. And so, as the music cuts out completely, we focus on Erwin, who too is left speechless for a moment by now a third crushing blow. Not only do they have 2 Titan Shifters completely surrounding them, their entire mission objective could be nullified in a few seconds if Bertolt just throws another kick. Oh yeah, and their only Titan Shifter and humanity's only hope was also just bodied. Realistically, Eren just charging Bertolt was a really, really bad idea, and they should have focused on blowing his legs apart or something like that to slow him down. But alas, Eren did get yeeted and deleted. On the Colossal side though, we finally get back to good old information asymmetry, with Jean very correctly pointing out that Bertolt doesn't know about the Thunder Spears. That is still our informational advantage that, don't forget, worked wonders against the Armored. Well, it sort of worked. I absolutely love all the shots we get of them soaring above the Colossal with just the rubble in the background. Just like on the other side of the wall, it really captures that sense of, this is a war zone. This isn't a small-scale skirmish like we saw with Kenny. No, following this point, each and every one of these fights, it's a war. This is the final point in the series where you can treat these battles as a question of survival. From this point forward, they will no longer be these small-scale localized brawls. No, they'll be large-scale offensives fundamentally designed to cripple the enemy forces. And the close-ups we get of the Colossal are also really, really cool. Only thing that really undermines a few of them is some of the CGI, unfortunately. Especially when we go from that super crisp 2D close-up to the oddly flat-looking CGI. What is most certainly not undermined, however, is the entire Mikasa sequence because, oh boy, the Thunder Spears latching back and exploding behind her in what is very much a cool guys don't look at explosions vibe is excellent. It is a little goofy that so little of the shrapnel actually catches her, but hey, at least there is at least some shrapnel to worry about, unlike another series I know. Also, this warp perspective shot of Armin is also excellent, and 1 is again an example of that forced perspective making the Colossal disproportionately large, and 2 also plants Armin in Erwin's position from a few episodes prior. But as much as I joke about the shrapnel, and I know this is like beyond overanalyzing, I love that we get those throwaway lines of Connie saying, oh I think I burned my throat, and Mikasa also getting caught by the shrapnel, etc. It doesn't have any lasting impact on the story, but just acknowledging their environment and its dangers, I think helps ground the conflict in ways a ton of stories simply overlook. For example, you know how in some movies you'll see like a burning building and the primary danger is just fire, right? Yeah, well, realistically, unless the entire thing is going up in a bonfire, the smoke is infinitely more dangerous to a person's survival. But the actual smoke is often not focused on because it's comparatively boring to, you know, like a big roaring fire. Same thing goes here, the Colossal Titan itself is obviously the primary thing to fear. But the smaller bits like shrapnel and the steam being, you know, actual steam, are also not forgotten. Big thumbs up. But with their final advantage too now thwarted, we really begin to see the hopelessness of the situation. Mikasa again asks whether Armin has finally figured something out. But just like Erwin, Armin too mumbles, no. And as if that wasn't enough, wait, there's more. Orion Air 2 is now back up. Because this is Attack on Titan, the director once again wanted us to stew on that for a little bit. And so we jump on over to the mid-card talking about the Colossal Steam. Practically speaking, for casual viewers, this is just a bit of a reminder of the Colossal's abilities, since, you know, we've seen him for like a grand total of 3 times throughout the entire story. In the bigger story though, this is the first ever time that we are explicitly told that the Steam ability is indeed finite, something that would of course end up being crucial in his defeat. And once again, obligatory Trost weirdness mention, because his steam comes from his muscles, his bones disappearing in an instant is very weird and still seems like an oversight to me. More on that next time though. Returning to the episode, we continue that constant back and forth between Eren and Armin and how both are absolutely hammered by Marley's forces. Literally, the first thing we see is Zeke throwing yet another fistful of rocks. There is no music, no dramatized build-up, nothing. And it's that casual nature of the scene that really creates that sense of this ticking time bomb constantly going on in the background. And actually, hold on. I think it's time for us to thoroughly overanalyze because we need to talk about Zeke's throwing speeds. If we take his height and estimate the length of his arm and how long it would take for that arm to swing forward, and using that we can look at the frequency waves. I've got literally no idea what I'm talking about. Smarter people than me have actually done the math though. I'll link the full thing below, but apparently his throws are Mach 2. Yeah, Mach 2 as in twice the speed of sound, as in those vapor waves and sonic boom thingies are actually legit. Look, I don't mean to be rude toward Bertolt, but I'm just saying, his size is a stylistic choice. Zeke just said, I don't need no stylistic choice, I actually throw at Mach 2. We talk a lot about Bertolt's nuke, that's not actually a nuke because, I mean, it's a huge explosion. Even Marley calls him the god of destruction. But Zeke is like orders of magnitude more dangerous than whatever Bertolt could do. To be totally honest, barring like the Founding Titan and maybe an extremely adept user of the Warhammer Titan, I think Zeke, and I don't mean the Beast Titan, I mean Zeke, I think he clears everyone. But okay, back to some degree of normalcy, we again see more mirroring of our two Blondie commanders, with both Levi and John just begging for some sort of command. And we also get a few more shots here to draw that stark contrast between the elites and the fresh recruits. We hear the constant wailing of the scouts in the background, while Levi and Erwin don't even acknowledge them. Despite the unrelenting barrage and the pretty obvious fact that there will be many losses, they are still focused on just getting Eren out. This is that paradoxical skill set of the elites that we've seen many times before. They have long given up on their own humanity. Their own survival doesn't mean anything. The only thing of importance is their mission. Characters like Floch, on the other hand, still exist in that naive state of thinking that they actually matter. And so, this almost slaughter really is a much-needed wake-up call that, at the end of the day, the supposed strength of the elites means very little in the end. The series literally opens with Keith's squad returning from a failed mission. Churn among the scouts has always been a thing, even before the Colossal Titan. No one here is some chosen hero, and he's simply falling prey to survivorship bias. Of course he thinks Erwin is a legend because he's still alive, but by the end of this mission, well, he wouldn't be. This is the brutal reality of war and all the propaganda we see. The scouts are heralded for their bravery, they constantly have these parades yada yada. Strength is presented as this virtue to pursue. But the bitter truth is that over 90% of them are just expendable meat sacks that the world will forget as soon as the next enemy appears. And on the flip side, we have Marlowe, who too has that almost main character syndrome, but he doesn't actually break. He's definitely not super strong or brave, but he doesn't totally break down either. And what I think elevates this moment even further, and what makes Floch's arc incredible, is that this realization that he isn't some chosen hero doesn't lead to his death. No, he actually survives. He goes from wailing on his knees to leading the Jaegerists against multiple Titan Shifters without ever breaking a sweat, because he survived. In his own terrible way, he did hear Erwin's message. After Shiganshina, he knows what an actual fight looks like. He knows the sacrifices that must be made. Marlowe, on the other hand, dies like the hero he envisioned himself as. Maybe thinking of Hitch, maybe thinking of the helpless MPs he left behind, or maybe nothing at all. There is never any great parade for him. He is never heralded as some savior of humanity. He is just one more in an endless crowd. His bravery and nigh Eren-level drive ultimately mean nothing. That is the tragedy of Attack on Titan. The heroes die a pointless death. One thing I absolutely want to note here though is the music. As we go from Floch coming to terms with his inevitable death, to Levi saying at least Hanji has to get out as those clouds of blood surround them, this sorrowful but hopeful symphonic suite plays in the background.
Levi, お前はどうするつもりだ?
すでに状況はそういう段階にあると思わないか?
Going to sound like a broken record here, but it's that intense juxtaposition of the music to the events we actually see that just creates that cocktail of emotion that is so familiar with Attack on Titan. And another thing I love here is notice Erwin's eyes and just how tired they look. This isn't anger or surprise or even his usual scheming. This is the Erwin we saw a few episodes prior, the one for whom the sun was already setting. The one who very explicitly proclaimed that he doesn't care if the mission fails so long as he sees what's in the basements. And as if Isayama hadn't cooked enough already, we also see this brief moment of vulnerability from Levi. He turns away from Erwin and says, "To be honest, I doubt a single one of us is making it back alive." This is a Kuroto video, so you already know what to expect. Back when the Walking Dead TV show, read the book, was still peak fiction, there was this incredible monologue from Rick that I think fits perfectly here. He talked about his grandfather, how he fought in the World War, and how, to cope with the horror of it, He told himself that he was already dead the moment he entered enemy territory. And so, every single morning, he woke up and simply said, "Rest in peace. Now get up and go to war." And I think that is exactly what we see with Levi. Sure, Ackermans are just absurdly OP, but the thing that actually makes him this perfect soldier is the fact that he has very little regard for his own life. Even right here, right now, he's saying he doesn't think they'll make it out, but that he'll charge Zeke alone in hopes of getting Eren, Hanji, and Erwin out. But hold on, because Isayama keeps cooking. Erwin then says, "You'd be right, if there was no chance of escape." And as that music cuts out completely, Levi gasps, and that tiny flame of hope is reignited. Not only does it speak volumes about Levi's trust in Erwin, but the sheer amount of emotional weight packed in those few seconds is downright insane. Someone like Levi actually having that sense of defeat on his face, all the while that blood-red mist and embers float all around him, only for all of that to abruptly be turned on its head as we hear that there is still a way. It's beautiful. And considering how this arc ends, Levi losing that almost older brother figure who could always give him hope and something to strive for is of course a whole different can of worms. Don't forget that this is the same Levi who found out that Kenny is actually family to him moments before losing him. Constantly ending up alone is his curse, and it's about to happen again. But wait, there is even more. Even while Erwin begins to explain the plan, yet another barrage comes in just as Erwin says that he and the recruits must die. It's again that intense whiplash from there being that tiny spark of hope to this wrecking ball coming in of, we have to die. There may be a chance, but it does not at all remedy the fact that this entire battlefield is already littered with corpses. And also, Jake Michael Tatum's voice acting here is just peak. Ono Daisuke maintains that usual cold and composed tone throughout, but the dub adds this ever so slight fatigue to every word Erwin says.
You'll have a decent chance of killing the Beast Titan.
獣を仕留めることができるかもしれない。
And speaking of, just how blunt Erwin is about everything here is also I think something that creates this weird cognitive dissonance. Normally, Erwin is very blunt about the gambles he makes and the potential fallout that might come from that. But this time, it's not even a gamble. He is explicitly saying, our complete extermination is still the most likely result. In order to ask these youths to die, we're going to need an awfully convincing lie. Which, you know, is very weird to hear from someone who has led impossible missions before. But before Levi can get another word in, he finally vocalizes his single deepest fear. He will have to be the one to lead the charge, so he'll be the first one to die, and he will never see the basement. I think the shock we see on Levi's face is two directly clashing questions. The first being, are you seriously thinking about the basement at a time like this? Our squad is dying, and that's what's on your mind? But at the same time, there is that second angle, because of course Levi knows. 2 separate times, Erwin explicitly told him that that is the only thing he cares about. So this isn't judgment, but rather fear and almost confusion, because Erwin just lost himself. If everything he has done leading up to this point is with the goal of reaching the basement, then is this him giving up? Is the mere act of acknowledging his fate basically game over? And we then get what is easily one of the most emotionally packed sequences in the entire series. Erwin just sits down and asks, "Can you see them? They're watching us right now." And as that piano cuts through, the entire town is just blasted over and over. The sheer spectrum of emotions here is something else entirely. There is sorrow, because I think deep down, all of us knew that this is it for Erwin. As far back as Season 2 and him smiling there, I think it was clear that he is losing steam very, very quickly. Attack on Titan is not a story where dreams are fulfilled, right? Every single one has been ripped away, so why should Erwin be the exception? But on top of that, almost mourning, there is also fear, terror, and confusion, because everyone we know is seconds away from death. Erwin's squad is completely boxed in, Eren's squad is basically wiped out, the Armored is back up, even Peak has popped back up, so in what universe do we get out of this without losing someone incredibly important? But even in that red mist, there is also the slightest, most painful flicker of hope, because what if all those sacrifices weren't for nothing? And so, Levi bows and simply says, "You fought well. We never could have come this far without you." And note that he hides his face. He doesn't make eye contact. Levi hides his expression. Let that sink in. And of course, as he looks back up, he is stone cold, simply saying, I am making the choice. Give up on your dreams and die. You will lead those recruits to hell. The dub switches out recruits for crying children, which I think even further accentuates that harshness of Levi's words. But point is, this is him essentially forcing himself to condemn his brother-in-arms to death. And of course, the tragic cherry on top, as Levi promises to kill the Beast Titan, Erwin simply smiles, and we cut away. This right here is the moment where Erwin's selfishness is entirely ripped away. The moment he truly becomes that selfless hero of humanity. He is no longer fighting for some bygone promise or to satisfy his own curiosity. Now, he is fighting for just one simple thing: a future. He will create the biggest spectacle possible. He will become a martyr to bolster the Scouts' resolve to, frankly, impossible levels. And the way that plays out is another stroke of genius. We just smash cut to them already charging, while Zeke is just nonchalantly saying, oh, didn't expect just to charge. And just as Erwin begins to explain the plan, we get the shot of Levi soaring above the remains of the town and just saying, I'm sorry. This is the no regrets Levi we all know, but there is also so much pain there. This time won't be like the Annie mission where his allies were killed by an unpredictable new enemy. This time, his own survival is currently being bought with hundreds of lives. Each and every one, including arguably the single closest person to him, knowingly charging to their deaths just so he survives. And the piano as that one scout just falls to her knees and throws up, oh boy. And what I think captures absolutely all of this is Flock asking, so all of this is just meaningless? There's no way out, we die, and that's it? We can disregard what you're saying? Erwin says, yeah, you're right, you can. But immediately puts the ultimate spin on that ever-present nihilism we see in the series. They are meaningless, every last one of them. They will die, everything they dreamed of, everything they ever achieved, everything about them will disappear in an instant. But what about the things that they will leave behind? The people they will leave behind? What about all of those people who died for them? If you're about to charge into that endless black abyss of nothing, then do it for the people who won't yet be joining you in that endless abyss. If you've been following the Overanalyzing series for a while, you probably expected this. But this is one of very few scenes where the dub is just so much more powerful. That complete 180 in Erwin's tone as he just screams,
They were not! Their lives have meaning because we, the living, refuse to forget them!
I believe, and I mean this wholeheartedly, this is one of the greatest monologues ever written in fiction. Not just because of how iconic it is, but because the message it carries is the embodiment of the entire story. This is Mikas's "the world is cruel but also beautiful." This is Eren locked in his never-ending nightmare. This is Armin's dream of the sea, regardless of how much pain he has seen. The way you can take that fundamental nihilism and people literally charging to their deaths and spin it into the most selfless, virtuous charge akin to Aragorn is nothing short of brilliance. This is the essence of Attack on Titan. The relentless struggle for survival in a cold and brutal world, and the enduring spirit of humanity. This is a primal scream of defiance against the void that is death itself. The embodiment of humanity's rage, not channeled through some magical Titan being, but simply their own strength. Just like we saw with Levi, Erwin's words cut through that despair and ignite the flame in their hearts, a flame that will burn them to ashes. That statement of, give up on your dreams and die, sounds absurd, but it truly is sacrificing everything, even one's own dreams, for someone else's future. This is the moment that truly solidifies Erwin as the selfish hero who, in the end, gave up everything. And Tatum here, oh man, Tatum, you glorious man. This obviously isn't a slight at Daisuke at all. I very much love the Jotaro Erwin too. And I also suspect that this is again that angle of me just understanding English instead of having to read the subs. So that emotional weight just hits like infinitely more because there is no degree of separation. But still, first off, this man's acting has me looking for a horse IRL because let's go, I want to charge into my death. But secondly, this glorious man decided to actually live in Erwin's brain. Just like Erwin gave up on his dream and never learned the secret of the basements, Tatum never continued the series after Erwin's death. This man must be protected. And also, this speech is so damn iconic that it has me going back to the AMV days. I will link my absolute favorite using the Oppenheimer music in the description. If you're as far down the Attack on Titan rabbit hole as I am, which I suspect you are, it will give you a pretty bad existential crisis. But that aside, one last thing I want to mention here is how his speech is actually incorporated, because if you really think about it, the thing we hear, and I'm sorry if I'm going to plant this in your brain now, is not actually the thing he says. There is a break in between where he's talking to the scouts, and the actually my soldiers rage part when they're on the horses. So either those are two entirely separate things, or maybe Erwin said, hold up, we need to pause my speech real quick, I'm gonna finish when we're actually writing. So I don't know. I'm just going to say, I literally don't care. I'm very glad that they used the rule of cool, because this sequence is perfect. I don't have anything scripted for this sequence. I really, really don't. Let me just play it, like, once, because, man.
My soldiers rage!
And on that very bittersweet note, that is episode 53. I'll be honest with you, this was a video that I was really, really dreading, because when I write these scripts, I obviously do the whole overanalyzing thing. I talk about every single episode for like 30-40 minutes, but going back, there are so many episodes where I feel like I've glossed over something, I want to talk about it more. And I'm sure I will at some point. It's going to be like overanalyzing, but with this episode and Erwin's speech at the end there are so many things that I feel like are left unspoken, and no matter what I write in the script, it will never really capture that sense. It's that, like, intangible thing that made the entire sequence so beautiful, and I was sitting at the script, it's now complete, I'm recording it, but a lot of what I said, I feel like still leaves so much to be not said, unsaid. I don't even know how else to put it. I hope you enjoyed this little mix-up in format. It's going to keep evolving like this, but with this episode marking this pivotal turn in the story, there's so much that I feel like I could add, but also, there's nothing to add, and that leaves me in this very, very odd place. This little bit here, as you're probably able to tell, not scripted. My soldiers rage, that is just something I don't think I can write any words about. I'm sure some of you will share the same sentiments. Some of you probably think that I'm being overdramatic here, but it is what it is. This is a truly incredible series, and man, is this a incredible episode. That said though, there is no time to get sentimental, because we are still in a streak of legendary episodes, and next time we'll be taking on the Big Monkey and the old Steamy Boy. So, I hope to see you back as we continue overanalyzing Attack on Titan. And that's the video. Trust me when I say this is one I really, really struggled with, to the point that I may or may not already have another script in the works about this episode. That aside though, I'm happy to see that the camera setup does actually sound nice now, but I still want to close the gap between my room recordings and the camera setup. Unfortunately, that may or may not require another Amazon cart full of stuff, but we'll see. And one last thing I want to mention, and I did make a community post about this, but I am committing to running all 3 of my channels relatively regularly. The priority is, of course, still this channel. Nothing's going to change about that, but if you want to see more of me doing a bunch of wacky things, check out the other channels in the description. Other than that, I want to say a massive thank you to our current patrons and YouTube members who allow me to produce even more of these for you all. Without you, there'd be a whole lot less of my rambling, so seriously, thank you, thank you. Other than that, I want to say thank you very much for watching, I hope you have a great day, and hopefully, I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye!